Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
Today's episode is not quite the episode we were looking forward to this week. Instead of going right into our conversation about fraud and the congressional hearing, we are starting out on a bit of a more somber note. As we discussed previously, ICE has been operating in Minnesota for the past month or so. This week, there was a shooting involving an ICE agent, and a citizen was killed. We're going to start by breaking down the incident, what we know, and the reactions from political leaders and Minnesotans. Following that conversation, we will venture back into fraud, and we will break down the new report by the Office of Legislative Auditor, uncovering more fraud and more troubling actions, and get into who knew what, when, and who is to blame. We are excited to be joined by John Rouleau and Julius Hernandez to have this conversation. Thank you for joining us today, and enjoy the show. We want to start by thanking our guests for joining us today. And before we dive in, we want to set the tone for this conversation. These are heavy topics, and there's a lot of passion and emotion wrapped up in them. But our goal today is to hopefully have a civil, respectful conversation about some of these ugly issues, and to show people that folks like us with different viewpoints can talk through them without yelling past each other. We don't have to all agree, but I think we can all be respectful here. So I know we like to get fiery, and we can certainly do that, but I just want to make sure that we are remaining respectful throughout the conversation. So thank you both for being here and being willing to dive into some of these topics. We are going to start with the elephant in the room, which is ICE in Minnesota and the shooting that occurred this week. Starting first, just with the facts about ICE being in Minnesota, we know that DHS has said that they have deployed more than 2,000 officers to Minnesota. Commissioner Noem has said that more than 1,500 people have been arrested. We did discuss this a little bit with the I think it's called Operation Surge, Metro Surge here. We talked about this a little bit back in December about some of the individuals that have been apprehended with violent criminal backgrounds. We know that that is happening, where we also know that there is obviously a lot of contention surrounding this. We know that Mayor Frey, Governor Walz say that ICE isn't helping. And we know that on the Republican side, we're, taking aim at that, causing some issues here in Minnesota. So again, before we get into the shooting itself, just a quick conversation about what's going on. John, I know we chatted a little bit about this, about some of the criminals that have been arrested. I'll throw it to you to talk about what we've been seeing from the Trump administration and ICE's actions here in Minnesota so far.
First, I think given yesterday's events, it's important that we start with the fact that, any loss of human life is always a tragedy. Unfortunately, it's entirely unsurprising that we see dangerous activities like this, where you have liberal politicians who are out there and really inflaming the situation, where we have Governor Walz calling ICE agents the Gestapo, where you have politicians out there saying that ICE agents and Homeland Security executing lawful orders for removal and warrants is akin to kidnapping, that you end up with these incredibly online Democratic liberal activists who are out there LARPing as vigilantes and putting themselves in dangerous situations and impeding legal law enforcement activities. So very tragic situation, unfortunately a preventable situation. And I have the utmost confidence that the investigation will bring the facts to light. And, I think it's important that our law enforcement knows that we continue to stand with them and that we're grateful for the work that they're doing here in our state, keeping Minnesotans safe.
Julius, I know, I want to be making sure that everybody gets to chat about their thoughts on this. We saw Governor Walz and Mayor Frey say the opposite, that they're blaming President Trump and the Republicans for this. What are your thoughts on what John had just said and what we've heard from some of our elected leaders on this so far?
Yeah, I thought we'd maybe wait a little bit to get into propaganda, but if that's what we're going to do early on, then that's what we can do early on. It's really quite an unfortunate and sad situation when ICE agents shoot a woman, and then the response from most Republicans is that it's liberal politicians who inflame the situation. It actually is that the federal government has decided that they don't care what states have to say about situations when it comes to federal enforcement or whatever this was. And they kill someone, and somehow it's Tim Walz and Jacob Frey's fault. It's not. It's the agent who shot the woman. It's people like Donald Trump who sent 2,000 ICE agents to this city when a majority of this city and its leaders have said they do not want them here, and we warned in advance that this is what would happen, and it did. And that is the unfortunate reality of the situation. This isn't Jacob Frey's fault. This isn't liberal politicians' fault. This isn't chronically online Democratic activists' fault. This isn't Jacob Frey or Tim Walz or Keith Ellison. This is Donald Trump and Kristi Noem and the people who work at ICE who we asked not to be in this city because they would cause more problems than they would help. And that is exactly what happened. And instead of saying, hey, maybe this is a bit too much, they've decided to double down. So I think it's quite disingenuous. I think it's quite garbage to sit here and say that Democrats are inflaming the situation. It's not. We didn't shoot anyone. Jacob Frey or Governor Walz didn't shoot anyone. They didn't ask ICE to be here. They asked for them to not be here. It was a federal agent who did this under the direction of Kristi Noem and Donald Trump, and that is why they are in this city. So I just want to be clear about that, because I think it's incredibly, I know what you're about to say, Becky, and I'm sorry, but I think it's incredibly disingenuous to blame online activists and politicians' language after the woman who got shot was by an ICE agent directed by Donald Trump and Kristi Noem. So I just want to make that clear.
I want to say a few things here. I do want to, we'll get into the situation. I understand this is where, we get the both sidism, because from my perspective, I think that we've had President Trump and his administration say a lot of things that have inflamed rhetoric and riled people up. I also think that we have had the same from Governor Walz and Mayor Frey. I think while I'm all about states' rights and the like, you don't get to just say you don't want to enforce federal laws. And we have sanctuary cities, sure. But you don't just get to say, we don't want you here. If we want to talk about this I think that there is a component of the state failing to do their job when it comes to some violent criminals not being prosecuted, not going in through the court system, not being deported after committing violent crimes, sexual crimes, murders, the like. And I think that is something that is a factor in this, that is part of why federal agents have to intervene. Before we go a little bit further, Michael, I know you want to jump in as well. I would like to give you the opportunity to say a few things.
I just wanted to say that I think it's important that the four of us don't have to agree today. But I think the opportunity that the four of us have today is to show Minnesota that the four of us can offer differing opinions on this subject and find a way to recognize that the four of us have to work together. That's the one thing that I want to accomplish today, is that the four of us realize that we all have different viewpoints, and all of those viewpoints we may disagree with, but we recognize and respect that all four of us have a perspective. And the one thing that I want to accomplish today is I don't expect that we are all going to agree on the events of yesterday and what happened. But if we can showcase today that people can talk to each other and leave with some understanding that we all share a little bit of that community passport, of that responsibility to work together, I think we're better. That's what I want to accomplish today. And I'm not in any way, nor have I ever on any podcast tried to rein someone in and to limit their ability to speak. But I think it's important that we just recognize that we are conducting, I think, a social experiment today that I think a lot of people are going to listen to and discuss. And I think we should all remember that the public is watching, including this podcast. And let's try to leave with hearing each other out, not expecting there to be a disagreement, but understand that I think all of us want this state and this country to be better. That's all I just wanted to say.
Going into a little bit about the shooting, I'll start with my personal viewpoints on this. I can certainly, we've had conversations. I don't necessarily agree with the wide sweeping deportation methods that are going on. I do believe that there are violent criminals and really bad actors on the streets that have remained there, again, due to the lack of efforts by the Minnesota judicial system, by our courts, by our prosecutors, by our judges. And so I do believe that something needs to be done. And I think that we are looking at a situation where we see one side vilifying immigrants in different communities and one side vilifying police officers and federal officers who are tasked with doing a job and doing their duty. And that is a big clash that we are seeing at this point. And obviously that's what kind of happened this week. So when we look at the shooting itself, we have an incident Wednesday morning in South Minneapolis. A few different video views make things a little bit more or less apparent depending on which ones you look at. It appears that an officer or officers approach a SUV who is stopped, potentially stuck in the snow, potentially blocking traffic, potentially allowing ice through. Again, we hear all of these different stories. Investigators are going to be the ones that determine all of this. But there is a vehicle stopped. Officers approach the vehicle, appears to demand the driver to open the door. One grabs onto the door. There is one in front of the vehicle. The vehicle accelerates. Officer in front of the vehicle shoots at least once through the windshield, and one shot, potentially more, at a different angle. The woman is killed. Her name is Renee Good. She is 37 years old, was a mother. And then we see different instances or different information coming out. We hear from the Trump administration that she was trying to use the vehicle to attack or ram agents. We hear from others that that was not the case, that there was only the one officer in front. So, I mean, I guess I'm kind of throwing it up and knowing what people's response and reactions are. But going around, Julius, I will let you lead us off of the initial thoughts, which you've kind of already alluded to. Do you see any I'm sure you all have watched all the videos we have. Do you see any of what the Trump administration is seeing? Do you see any context or know any context of leading up to it? Was she waving ice through? Was she leading protesters? We've heard both from witnesses and folks on this. Is there anything more that you have heard or know, or initial reactions to the incident?
I'll just say a couple things. One is, I think it's very apparent if you watch any video from any angle, you're going to get a differing perspective about the situation at hand. What is also clear is that there is a specific angle that shows that the agent was not even in front of the vehicle as she was driving away. By the way, adhering to their orders, which was to get out of the way. And for whatever reason, she got shot in the face 4 times. The other part of this is that the White House has been doing some pretty serious damage control starting from the moment that this happened, which was initially Donald Trump's claim that this agent was in the hospital and that they were hit by the vehicle and hurt, but you see the agent walking away perfectly fine, getting in his vehicle and leaving. Donald Trump blames it on this woman, Renee Good, who, by the way, whose child is now parentless, doesn't have a mother or a father, and then later in the evening watches the video with New York Times reporters and basically backtracks what he says and maybe says maybe she didn't try to hit him with the vehicle. So I think that's the first part. There's going to be a lot of spin about what happened. She wasn't trying to hit him with the vehicle. Every witness in there, including, by the way, someone who went on the news and said, I actually vote for Republicans, and this is not true, said that. So for me, that is the base level. The second part of the equation is the response to this is proportional, I think, by Minneapolis citizens to what we should be saying, which is we have said we do not want the federal government here separating and dividing our communities and trying to take our neighbors away. We warned, Democratic politicians across the country warned, that this would be the response to a hostile federal government sending in agents that cover their faces, don't identify themselves, and act like they have the power of the government behind them to do whatever they want when they want to. And this is a perfect example of it. This is a perfect example. Now the federal government is not allowing local investigators to be a part of this, and I would question, why is that? But I think the broader question here, and Becky, this goes to a point that you made earlier, is why do we need 2,000 ICE agents in Minnesota? Does that seem appropriate to any of you at all? Does that seem like sending in a small private military-sized unit to come into the city is appropriate or proportional to the issues that we have regarding immigrants in the city? I think most people would tell you no. And I think this is just, again, another view of what Donald Trump's government thinks they can do, his administration thinks they can do. They believe they are above the law. They have used ICE in a way that is similar to private militaries who think they are above the law. I won't say Gestapo, but private police, whatever you want to call them. That is what they are acting like. And this is exactly what has happened, is going to happen and continue to happen if they continue with these operations. So I think it's, again, all of this comes down to, you're going to either say this was her fault or it wasn't her fault if she tried to hit him or not. And I would really urge a bunch of people to consider, why do we need this many people? Why do we need this many ICE agents in this city? And is this going to continue happening now more? Because people are going to be pissed off. People are upset, rightfully so. An innocent woman died, and her kid now has no parents because this administration believes they are above the law and following the law when it comes to immigration enforcement. This is not the first time we've seen it. This is not the last time we'll see it. And, that's pretty much it.
John, want to get your take on what Julius just said in the situation as we know it.
Well, I just want to clarify a couple of things that are out there. Obviously, my thoughts again go out to Renee Good's family, especially her 6-year-old child, but also her wife, who does not leave this child childless, thankfully. Her wife was with her at this scene and is in interviews and was talking about how they were there to impede ICE activities. The witnesses who were on the ground said that she was leading a caravan, that she was attempting to block ICE from doing their job. And I think lost in this, and I'm really glad that Julius brought up the fact that there are ICE agents deployed and why are they here. And I think that it's important that we remember the context in which ICE got here. And it comes directly through failed open border policies that President Biden pushed that were backed by people like Ilhan Omar, Angie Craig, and Amy Klobuchar. And then the sanctuary policies where the Minnesota DFL did exactly what Amy Klobuchar called for and started to offer taxpayer-funded health care for illegal immigrants that really turned us into a magnet for illegal immigrants to come to our state. Now, we can talk about what's going on, but we don't need to look too far to see weak on crime prosecutors, weak on crime policies, and weak on crime judges who have been appointed by Democratic governors for the last 20 years in Minnesota who have spun these people out. And so I think, let's just go through a couple of the things that people have been arrested for. They have prior convictions and had lawful orders of removal. Let's just go through a list. Sexual abuse of a minor, sex conduct, third-degree force or coercion, felony smuggling aliens, conspiracy to import at least 50 kilograms of cocaine, second-degree murder, sexual assault, sexual offense against child, sexual assault, carnal abuse, sexual offense against child, homicide, molestation of a minor, rape, human slavery, sexual assault, false imprisonment, burglary, and aggravated assault with a weapon, lewd or lascivious acts with a minor, sexual assault. Now, these aren't the only type of criminals who are being targeted by ICE and Homeland Security. There is also the largest fraud scandal in American history that is occurring right here in Minnesota that happened under multiple Democratic administrations. And we've seen what happens where we had a Somali national named Abdi Mohammed who was convicted of repeatedly raping minors, including when he kidnapped a 15-year-old, held her hostage for nearly a week, and repeatedly raped her. He was given probation 3 times. It wasn't until the federal government stepped in that he now faces charges where he faces a 20-year mandatory minimum if he's convicted again in federal court. The idea that ICE is not here to keep us safe, that they are not getting bad criminals off of our streets, is utterly ridiculous.
Does shooting someone in the face 4 times that's a U.S. citizen, is that keeping people safe?
I'll finish. And as they're here, we have our elected officials fanning the flames. When Tim Walz is out there 2 days in a row declaring that he is at war with the federal government, that is an absurd claim. When we have people who are calling them Gestapo, Just yesterday, you had Brad Tabke, a state legislator from Minnesota, refer to Secretary Noem as Joseph Goebbels. This is absurd. These are law enforcement officers conducting legal immigration enforcement activities, conducting legal Homeland Security investigations. It's not all ICE agents, it's also Homeland Security, HSI. It is all sorts of resources that we need in our state because our local elected officials, our prosecutors, and our judges have failed our state repeatedly over and over again.
Thank you for that. Julius, it sounded like you might have a rebuttal.
Yeah, I think shooting an American citizen in the face 4 times doesn't seem to me like protecting people. Kneeling on a pregnant woman after dragging her out of her vehicle doesn't seem like protecting people. Hitting protesters with government vehicles doesn't seem like protecting people. And by the way, does anyone here have the numbers on how many actual criminals ICE has arrested out of all the people they've arrested and deported in this country by their own numbers? I'm just curious, because I can tell you it's 70% of the people they've arrested in this country have no criminal record or background. It's really easy to take a bunch of really bad examples of people who absolutely should be deported and sent back to wherever they're from in this city or in this state. But 70% of all the arrests ICE have made have been people, by their own admission, by the way, have been arrests of people who have no criminal background or record whatsoever. So I don't buy this garbage story that somehow ICE is here to protect people. I don't really think it's, again, proportional to have 2,000 agents, the most that we've ever seen in immigration enforcement history in this city. It's not proportional to the issues we have here with our immigrant community, especially people who commit crimes. And the simple fact is this. You can sit here and say that Democrats are the problem, but I find it very interesting that not a single one of the people you have named has been a Republican like Donald Trump, who has made it an effort to violate states' rights over and over, called our governor, excuse my language, a retard, and then shared a conspiracy theory that he organized the assassination of a state legislator here who was a good friend of his. And by the way, for every person that watched, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, for every person that watched that hearing yesterday, Kristen Robbins, who didn't deny the fact that Tim Walz apparently tried to get his friend assassinated or claim that he had something to do with it, didn't deny it, and in fact, just like almost slightly agreed with it, is a coward. So I don't really want to hear all this about Democrats are fanning the flames and all this nonsense. What I heard from Jacob Frey yesterday was, you are causing problems. You're making it worse. Evidently they are. Get out of our city.
Okay. Just want to, I think we can agree to disagree that Republicans feel as though Walz and Frey and Democrats have said and done things to contribute to this. Democrats feel that Trump and Noem and Republicans have done and said things to contribute to this. I think you both have made it clear of things the other side has said. I think it is clear that politicians on both sides have said things that are inflammatory and have raised the temperature rather than cooled it down. I think that across the board, even if you don't want to point at this situation and this, in general, when we talk about all of the names that we have talked about, they have all in the last day, month, or year said things to contribute to the division between Republicans and Democrats, protesters, activists, politicians, normal citizens in this country. That is the fact of the matter. And I think that here we obviously have a differing of opinions on what should be done when it comes to enforcement in Minnesota. And so I'm going to keep us on that path. I think that you both raise really good points. I think I've said some of my opinions and will continue to do so. And obviously, to make it clear, I think I do lean a little bit more to some of the John opinions than the Julius ones. But I'm going to continue to try to move us forward and sharing these opinions and recognizing that really we have issues on both sides. I'm pulling the both sides card. Michael, I'm curious of your thoughts over what these two have said and what we've been discussing so far.
Becky, I'm going to be an advocate for what you just said, that I think that we're going to play the both sides a bit. I don't think anyone is without sin in terms of some of the rhetoric that has gone on. I think I put out a tweet last night that I said that I hoped that one of my hopes for today was that people were going to get off social media. They were going to log off, stop talking in, I think, sound bites for social media and start talking to each other. Pollyannish, yes, but it's the hopes and dreams of a 52-year-old who just wants Minnesota and our country to be a better place. I want to just say a couple of things, not to, again, both sides it, but just say some points that everyone has made here that I agree with. First of all, one of the things I don't talk about a lot in this podcast is I wrote a book. I wrote a book about the disappearance of missing kids. It is incredibly difficult to listen to the crimes that John detailed and not see a benefit, a substantive benefit to one of those individuals being off the street. I have to say, as someone who didn't vote for Donald Trump, as someone who has not supported him, I don't think anyone in this state who is going to think that Minnesota is less safe because those people are not here. The truth of the matter is, every time a violent criminal with any type of record can be taken off the streets of Minnesota, I think we are a safer place because of it. Simultaneously, I can also say that people have a right to engage in First Amendment protected activity. I'm a First Amendment absolutist. I am frequently lampooned by my friends for being such a First Amendment absolutist. You have a right to protest ICE agents. You have a right to protest and observe law enforcement. But when you put your vehicle in proximity to you go from being protester and you go from being observer to protester to getting actively involved, there is a life that has been lost here. We all, I think, constantly throughout this episode need to remember who Renee Good was and what was lost, and that a life was lost. That is tragic beyond comprehension. But the truth of the matter is that I absolutely believe that the animosity and the hostility and the amping up of the rhetoric, this is not surprising to me that this happened. This is not surprising. I think we are straddling a line, and I'm not trying to both sides it. What I'm trying to say is I think that ICE should be conducting lawful raids, operating within the boundaries of the law that they're allowed to do. I think citizens should be allowed to observe, to protest, to voice their frustrations as they see them about those raids. When we get to the point where those two sides come together and get into a conflict, this is the type of situation that happens. I weep for this state. I weep for this woman's family, for her child, and I am so sad by what has occurred. But this, Becky, we in other episodes have talked about this. This is not a surprising development. And I want to give everyone an opportunity to talk, but I'm not trying to both sides it. But I do believe that there are things that Julius said that I agree with. There are things that John said that I agree with. And Becky, there are a lot of things that you said that I agree with. And so let's keep the conversation going. I'm proud of where it's going so far, but I just wanted to chime in and offer that perspective.
I do want to move into some of the reactions we heard, starting with Governor Walz. During a press conference, I will say his tone and demeanor, I thought were great. Didn't love everything that he had to say, but he immediately said he would be calling in the National Guard. I would say it's night and day different than the reaction we saw following the murder of George Floyd. It's potentially, had this happened then, we would have seen the stop of some of those riots in our city burning down. So I do applaud a quick and decisive action and response from the governor. I didn't love where he turned to, again, the blame game. He urged Minnesotans to not believe the propaganda machine. He said, I want to be very cautious here because Donald Trump will make this all about me. He goes on to say what we are seeing is a consequence of governance designed to generate fear, headlines, and conflict. It's governing by reality TV. And today, that recklessness cost someone their life. And I don't disagree with some of those sentiments. I don't know that initially that was the time or place to have that conversation. In fact, right after Governor Walz called this officer a murderer, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety head, Bob Jacobson, in the same press conference immediately following their response said, "We don't comment on active investigation, and this investigation is in its infancy. Any speculation on what happened would be just that, and we do not engage in speculation." And I think that's where I wish both sides, Kristi Noem, Donald Trump, Mayor Frey, Governor Walz, would all have stopped and recognized a life was lost. It was horrific. We need to fully investigate, get the facts, get the situation, get the witnesses' account, figure out what happened before claiming that she was attacking officers, claiming that this was a murderer. I think it was, as you even Julius said, from different angles, we see different things and notice different things. I think there's some that make it really appear an officer jumps out of the way, and there makes it some that makes it appear that he wasn't in danger at all, or makes it look like he was not in danger at all. I think that we need to let the professionals do what they do. And so I do love that the governor came out and again took decisive action, was a leader in this point. And I would say I appreciate what he did much more than what I saw from Mayor Frey. We saw in his press conference, he said to ICE, "Get the F out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some sort of safety, and you are doing the opposite." Again, understand the sentiment, but just the way he did that allowed any actor who is against ICE, against the federal government, against the situation, to feel emboldened, what we saw in the protests last night, to say F you to these officers, to be blatant in their face, saying, "We don't want you here, get the F out." Understand the sentiment, completely inflaming that situation. And I think it was really inappropriate and over the top for the mayor of the city of Minneapolis to drop the F-bomb. Rouleau, John Rouleau. Oh, Julius, you go first.
Are we like, first of all, I just want to listen. I think I have made clear that I genuinely appreciate the values that you all bring, that other people that I've been on this with, Preya, John, you guys I bring. But it's just it's absurd to me that every time we get into something like this, that there's just not, this isn't a both sides thing. There is no value to adding, hey, but Donald Trump did this, or Kristi Noem did this, or Jacob Frey did this. There's a set of facts that are clear right now. Donald Trump and his administration have stopped investigators from the state of Minnesota from being a part of this investigation.
Because it's a federal investigation.
And that would mean then, to me, why aren't they cooperating with local law enforcement? Do they not trust law enforcement? Don't Republicans trust law enforcement in the state? Anyone?
That's just typically not how it happens when a federal investigation is occurring.
It happened in our jurisdiction. It happened in our jurisdiction where our investigators would be allowed to be a part of that. Right or wrong?
This is what I would call a jurisdictional mess right now. And I'll just stake the claim that I think the best way of the most effective way to deal with the transparency of this investigation would be allow the BCA and the federal government to work alongside. I will state that very clearly.
But Republicans trust law enforcement until it's hey, the federal government decides that they want to step in and do it all themselves. This was a private citizen of the state of Minnesota that was shot by a federal law enforcement agent. If the government had any sense of integrity, they would allow local investigators to be a part of that investigation. That's the point I'm trying to make.
I agree with you. I agree with you that from a transparency standpoint, it would be good if the BCA worked alongside the federal government. I agree with you. I'll let Becky and John speak for themselves, but I want to just be mindful of the open-ended comments. If you want to ask me my opinion on law enforcement, I'll offer it. If you want to ask me my opinion on an investigation, I'll ask it. But just don't assume that we're all in the same bucket, okay?
Okay. Then the second part of this is everyone's pissed off about Jacob Frey dropping an F-bomb, but no one's upset about Donald Trump's statement that this immediately throwing out there that this was Renee Good's fault. No one's upset about Kristi Noem saying, whatever she said at her presser. No one's upset about Kristi Noem riding around like a cowboy Barbie with cameras, recording innocent people being taken off the street and brutalized or whatever they're doing to them. This is the point of why I hate this both sides nonsense. There is a federal government that is violating plenty of law over and over, and we're upset about the mayor of Minneapolis dropping an F-bomb and Donald Trump. Well, hold on. Let me just finish the statement. I'm not saying you guys, but what I'm
That's
saying
what it's
is
coming
the
across
general,
like.
no,
You're
no, no.
saying
I'm
does
not saying
everybody?
you guys. I'm not saying you guys. The general sentiment among Republican leadership, the general sentiment among Republican pundits, the general sentiment among the MAGA base that I have seen, not including you guys. I'm not lumping you in there. I'm talking about Tom Emmer. I'm talking about Kristi Noem. I'm talking about Donald Trump, people who lead the Republican Party. That doesn't mean you have to fall in that bucket. But the point I'm trying to make is like we're throwing out there this idea that people need to be upset about Jacob Frey saying the F-bomb. Is that really what we're talking about here? Is that really, there is a dead woman who was killed by a federal agent, and we're talking about Jacob Frey saying the F-bomb versus the fact that Donald Trump came out and said that this was the fault of Renee Good without having any investigation done. And Kristi Noem blamed Democrats and Democratic leadership when they weren't even near the scene of the crime.
John, before I turn it over to you, Julius, I do want to say that I did start this by saying I don't appreciate what Walz and Frey said, and I don't appreciate what Trump and Noem said. I think just as you said, and you were articulating your frustration with Trump saying things without an investigation, I think the same goes to Walz and Frey. My frustration is not about Mayor Frey saying the F word. It's about what it inflames. It is what it allows, what it means to folks who hear that and say, I can say that too. I can act that way too. I can interfere, and moving it from the peaceful protest, moving it from voicing first opinions to interfering with this, regardless of whether you like it or not. This is public officers, public safety officers, federal agents doing a job that they were hired and asked to do by instruction of the federal government, and interfering in that to me is a step too far.
So
and that's where.
Can I ask a question though? This is what I'm trying to get to the point of, is like, my question to you, and this is the frustration I think I can portray for most people that are maybe Democrats or on my side of the situation about this, which is, are you more upset that the President of the United States made it claim that this was Renee Good's fault before the investigation was done, and does that inflame more people to justify law enforcement acting without any guardrails, that they can do whatever they want and that they'll be allowed to do this, and the President of the United States, whether they're in the right or wrong, is going to back them? Or are you upset about the local government saying, we don't want you here because you are causing chaos? Which one to you seems like the bigger issue? I get we're trying to do like this balanced approach, and I appreciate it, I do. But there is a very clear issue, which is the President of the United States, who is supposed to unite all of us, put out a statement blaming a protester who was shot and killed without any investigation. But the issue that's being brought up most here is that Jacob Frey and Governor Tim Walz also said some stuff. And that's my question. Which one is bigger? Because it doesn't seem to me like there's an equivalence here. That's my question, and that's what I'm confused about.
And I guess I will say that's where I believe there is an equivalence, because I believe we need to see what's going on. I see one side blaming the woman. I see one side blaming the officer, and no investigation has been done. I've seen what I've seen. And I think, I mean, if I'm going to say what I think is questionable, I think that it looks as though this woman was asked to move, to get out of her car. It looks as though there is one officer in front of there that is reasonably, understandably, could have feared for his life. I don't believe that video shows that there were multiple people that were potentially going to be, that she was potentially driving at. I understand where from it looks scary from, I can only imagine what it looked like from his perspective. However, and in one video from far away, looks as though he does get brushed by the car. That again said, everything I've seen, some legal analyst, it does appear that even if the one shot through was justified, the multiple shots from the side after he was out of the way and no longer in danger and nobody else was in danger, does look like that was not justified. I mean, that is my personal, non-legal, non-investigative, not having all the facts take. That's where I stand. So this is where I am on the side of being equivalent, that I see some things that make me feel as though this man could understandably believe his life was in danger. I believe some things that I've seen that show that this woman was trying to drive off and drive away and leave the scene and not be a problem anymore. I don't know. I don't have all the facts. I'm not the investigator. I am not the federal government. I am not a part of a government agency. And that's where my ultimate thing is that we need to let the job be done. We need to not inflame. We need to not tell one side, go F off these people and interfere. We don't want them here. Let's send them home when they're doing their job. We don't need one side saying, screw all of you guys, all immigrants and people who are not U.S. born on U.S. soil are bad. I don't like any of it. Sorry, I got a little fired up here, but that is truly where I stand, and that's where I'm having the biggest issue in trying to regulate this and get everybody seen, because I do see so much from both sides, and I'm really freaking pissed off of what we are hearing and seeing from our elected leaders on this. John, you've been really quiet. I want to turn to you. Do your thing.
No, I appreciate it. And I just want to bring us back to where we started with this, which was the statements from Governor Walz and Mayor Frey. And I think I have a couple of concerns with some of the things that Governor Walz said, right? Specifically, that no state has ever been at war with the federal government, right? He views this as a war from the government because they are here enforcing federal laws and executing lawfully issued warrants. I just think that's a really, really dangerous path to go down, where you start viewing your state as being at war with the federal government. From a semantics point, I would argue that a history teacher should know that this is absolutely not. If that were the case, it would not be the first time that a state was at war with the federal government, but we're not at war with the federal government. And I have a lot of concerns about the idea that some law enforcement activities are okay to interfere with. And Michael talked about it a little bit, right? That there's that line between observer, between protester, and then between involving yourself in the situation. And the rhetoric that we've seen puts people in a dangerous place where they start to run around like they're LARPing as vigilantes and trying to interfere with law enforcement activities. And you don't get to pick and choose which laws are going to get enforced. You don't get to pick and choose which government agencies you're allowed to interfere with. And I think that we need to get back to a place where we understand that's not how we solve things in this country, that we don't assault law enforcement, that we don't. And I think Mayor Frey and Governor Walz, we talk about kind of the prejudging the outcomes. Both of them prejudge the outcomes. And, I'm hopeful that for all of the politicians who are out there who want to jump to conclusions, there will be an investigation. I have full confidence in the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are the best investigators in the country. And I think that the facts are going to come out, and we'll be able to have a conversation, and we'll be able to see what the facts and findings were. But it would be absurd for any federal agency to let their employee get dragged in by state prosecutors, to state investigators, to go and look through this. So the idea that they should change the rules, I think we'll get transparency and it'll come in due time.
If I could chime in and respond to that, this is a jurisdictional mess. And I agree with a lot of what John said, but I'm going to fall into this line right now. I don't like the statement that was put out by ICE describing the situation. I don't like the commentary, the rhetorical commentary that's happening on both sides. What's interesting about that is that the federal government and the state of Minnesota have investigatory agencies in their purview and in their direction. But leading those agencies, leading the federal government and leading the state of Minnesota are partisan elected officials. And what my concern is, what happens when all the tweets and the posts and everything stops and we get to a discussion about what happened in this case? In the aftermath of George Floyd, in the murder of George Floyd, there was a statement put out by law enforcement that was later analyzed and looked at as not being as precise and accurate as it should be. I think, to me, as someone who's not an agent of law enforcement, but has written a book about true crime and has followed these issues closely, I have to say that I have concerns about the accuracy of the statement put out by ICE and how it was described. My concern is we all have eyes and we saw what happened yesterday. And so if those types of characterizations of events are going to factor into a professional investigation, there's going to be a problem in this case going forward. I say the same about some of the comments that were made at the state level. I think the balance and what I would like to see, again, maybe Pollyannish, what I would like to see is a state and federal investigation that looks at these facts, that works alongside. I understand that this is a bureaucratic mess, but I think from a transparency standpoint, that there needs to be more eyes in this investigation than less because of some of the comments that were made yesterday. That's my take.
Well, I just want to remind the listeners, that we have politicians who oversee these agencies, but so many of the people who do the work and the important work at these agencies, at these investigatory bodies, are career civil servants, right? And these are nonpartisan people, and it doesn't matter if it is the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and we see that they follow the facts where they lead. I think it's important to remember that those are the folks who are looking into this, that it's not anybody who's out there prejudging or predetermining, because I think even before multiple videos came out, we saw that there were already decisions being made. And, I think if you look, Tom Homan, the head of Border Patrol, was out there yesterday, and he said, I've seen one angle of this. I can't prejudge this. I can't predetermine this. And I think when you get to the career civil servants, there's angles that we haven't seen that are not available, right? There's probably body camera footage. There's probably dash camera footage. There's certainly other angles of people who were filming this that I know exist just because we can see them in the frame of some of these other videos with their cameras up, and we haven't seen an angle like that has shown up. So I'm sure that they're investigating, and we need to let this shake out. But I think it's a time that we have an opportunity to take the temperature down, and I'm optimistic that our local leaders who are closest on the ground here will take the opportunity to do so.
I think we can all agree more will come out, more will be known. We'll figure out what is identified as what actually happened here. But I think we all agree a life was lost, a woman was killed, a son no longer has his mother, and that is a really tragic, unfortunate situation, and hopefully the last that we will see. I would like to join with anybody who is thinking about voicing your First Amendment rights and being out there and protesting, of being safe and doing so peacefully, and remaining safe out there for all, because it is scary to think of what happened in the past after the George Floyd murder, and we certainly don't want any of that. We want to keep everybody safe, keep our community safe, and we'll watch this all come out. I think one thing that we can agree on is that through this, from Republicans to the left and Democrats to the right, we have issues with trust in our government and our elected officials, and wondering what's going on, who's in charge, what's going to happen, and how are we going to work together. And that's my transition into fraud. Because I think that we have a lot of questions when it comes to who's in charge, what's going on, and the trust in what we're being told, and the trust in what we're knowing and when we know it, and who's to blame with this. I think that this is something my partisan hat comes on a little bit more strongly than it maybe did in the last part of our conversation. So we're going to discuss the OLA report that came out. So on January 6th, the new report came down from the Office of the Legislative Auditor, nonpartisan document. The same day there was a hearing where Judy Randall, who is the Minnesota Legislative Auditor, she has been with the Legislative Auditor's office for almost 3 decades. She described what this report as a systemic effort that she had never seen in nearly 3 decades, again, with that OLA. And it focuses on a lot of different things: program oversight, internal controls, compliance failures inside state agencies, and in this situation, primarily DHS and related grant administering entities. This is a lot different than a lot of the fraud that we've been talking about thus far, because it isn't about fraud being done by average citizens taking advantage of the situation. This is about fraud and mismanagement issues happening within a government agency. It is pretty shocking, some of the stuff that came out in this. There's, Judy Randall said that they have actual evidence of state employees throughout the grant administering process, so not just one part, but multiple levels of this oversight, creating or altering records after the fact to justify decisions that had already been made. They're backdating and creating new documents, including approvals or documents retroactively created to show compliance with requirements that were not actually met at the time. I want to hit the story that Seth Kaplan, a local reporter, hit on that I think is just mind-boggling to me. He tweeted, during one audit, the grantee could not provide detailed invoices or participant data to support a payment of $672,000 from BHA for 1 month of work. This grantee subcontracted with 14 subcontractors, and the OLA office, OLA visited 2. Neither could provide any documentation regarding what they did with the money. Additionally, the grant manager at BHA who approved this payment, this $672,000 payment, shortly after the approval, left a few days after approving the grant and started a consulting service to the grantee. Wow. And this is something that only came out in this audit. You can't tell me that somebody else didn't know that this happened, that they went over there. So Rouleau, I'm going to let you have it. Give me all of your juicy takes on this and what we've seen and what you know.
I mean, another disastrous fraud story in the state of Minnesota. It must be a day that ends in Y. But this is particularly egregious, where you have government employees, and it's not just one, as Auditor Randall said, it's systemic. It is across the board throughout this agency, and I think let's remember how big of a program this is. This program oversees nearly $500 million in its annual budget. I think it was $452 million. And when you go through and you have government employees forging and falsifying government documents over the course of the audit. I don't pretend to be an attorney or to really know that, but one thing that struck me was last night there was a story about this on KSTP, and the former U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Erica McDonald, was sitting there and was asked, is this a red flag? And she said, absolutely. Anytime you have a government employee making false material claims in the course of an audit is 100% an issue. So I think there's more to this story. The timing was actually interesting in that story. It came out that the Walz administration was given a heads up about 3 weeks ago what the contents of this audit were going to be. And so a day before it came out that his administration was forging and falsifying government documents, Governor Walz decided to end his re-election campaign seeking that third term. Not much of a conspiracy theorist, but that is awfully convenient timing. But no, I agree. The most egregious one was, I think they described it as within days, right, that this person signed off on a $672,000 payment. I think it was the first in a series, and then, nearly immediately left and moved to payroll of the organization that they signed off on. This fraud story, every time you think that it can't get worse, it does. And it is a systemic problem. I was looking back last night at some of the OLA reports of the Office of Legislative Auditor from back years ago, and this is not a new problem that the Walz administration is seeing. This is absolute rot within all levels of government run by Democrats over the last 20 years in Minnesota. We have cases and audits back to 2009, 2013, 2018, 2019. We've seen retaliation against whistleblowers during Governor Walz's time in office. And I don't think we've seen the last of this. And, unfortunately, I don't think we've seen the worst of it.
Michael, I'm curious what you thought. I know you tweeted a little bit, and we, aside from a few tweets and articles, didn't talk about this purposely because I know we wanted to get a general reaction here. What do you think? I mean, to me, it's damning, it's shocking, it's not also surprising, but what is your take on it?
Look, I think that fraud is going to be an ongoing subject, a subject that we're going to have to continue to discuss in future episodes. This was astounding to me. This is, my late father was a CPA and a forensic accountant. I don't wish that the fraud was going on, but I wish my old man was still around because we would be talking about this almost daily. This is really serious. And I think the former U.S. attorney for the state of Minnesota, Erica McDonald, said it best. This is incredibly problematic. This is the forging, falsifying of documents puts this into an entirely new arena. And look, the fraud is massive. We have a serious problem in the state about fraud. And I think that I think the size of it is difficult to comprehend when you're talking about it being upwards in the billions of dollars. But it is pretty easy for people, I think, to understand the problems that exist when a state agency is involved in backdating, forging, and manipulating documents over the course of an audit. And the timing of when the governor's office knew about this, I think it is not a conspiracy at all to draw a line between those things. Fraud is still going to be an issue going forward. And I think that this sets this into an arena that we have not yet seen. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see how this develops in the coming days and weeks.
Julius, we know that the governor and many Democrats have taken aim at the fraud target and spotlight just being, kind of manipulated by President Trump and Republicans on this. This coming from a nonpartisan political office, or a nonpartisan office here in state government, what's your thought on this report and how it kind of plays into the larger scheme of fraud in the state government here under Walz?
Yeah, I mean, you're probably not going to get what you want from me here. I'm not like a legislative expert. I don't understand how billing works in these offices. I don't understand what goes into a legislative auditor report. It's bad. There's no reason you should be backdating payments and like making documents to say that they're, making up documents to say that they're false. I don't know. I just don't know. But like what you're going to find here is the same response I give you every time we talk about fraud, which is simple. It's bad. And it's like, it's not a thing that I'm going to sit here and defend the Walz administration on. I don't know who, I haven't read the report myself in its entirety. I've only read stories about it. So I don't know who's making these documents up. Like, what agencies are they a part of? Where are they coming from? And I think that's important. And like, you'll hear it from me if it's a direct correlation with the administration, like, then it's a problem. But if it's some far off person in an agency that has no correlation, then fire that person and find someone who has some integrity. Maybe they were just lazy. I don't know. That's the point, is like, this is obviously a red flag, but we've had quite a few red flags in the state about fraud. I think the broader conversation here is like, we have a legislator with a Republican speaker and a fraud committee that has the ability to put guardrails in for this stuff. It's as simple as that, right? Like, should the governor have some authority here to do something? Yeah, and he's put in some independent people to kind of figure this out and figure out how we can have more integrity in these programs. But it's also the responsibility of the fraud committee, who hasn't done anything tangible, to take, if they're going to claim that Governor Walz hasn't done anything, to take the lead and do something. So, I mean, if we're going to, like, it ultimately comes down to, we can point fingers and cry and blame about who's responsible for all of this. And maybe you have some merit in it, maybe you don't. But you have a committee that has the authority to put in legislative action to make changes to how these all work, and so that we don't get this again. So I would like to see the fraud committee in this next cycle actually, do something. That would be helpful.
I'd like to chime in real quick because I think it's super important that we don't mislead the listeners into believing something that hasn't happened, because the Republicans in the House of Representatives actually had a bill to do exactly this. It was House File 2. It established an independent Office of Inspector General that was not beholden to the governor, that was not somebody on the governor's staff, and that oversaw all of these programs. That passed with broad bipartisan support in the state Senate. The bill was actually carried by DFLers and Republicans together. And when it was brought to the floor in the House of Representatives, every single Democrat in the chamber voted against it repeatedly. there's a reason that it didn't pass, and it's not Republicans. Every Republican voted in favor, and it died on a tie because every single Democrat in the House voted no over and over.
Is there an office of Inspector General now? Is there an office?
Not an independent office of the Inspector General, no. And that's why there was a broad bipartisan support for this effort that came out of the state Senate. I think it passed, almost 60 votes?
So the Office of Inspector General right now is not independent of the governor's office?
It is not, as a gubernatorial appointee. That is why the legislature decided to try and implement an independent Office of Inspector General. That is not a political appointee. That is not somebody who works for the governor. And the inspector generals actually who are there are agency specific, but there is not an outside entity. The closest that you have is the Office of the Legislative Auditor, which is a nonpartisan role, again, career civil servants. And no, every single House Democrat voted against it, despite the broad bipartisan support in the Senate.
Well, we must have a different understanding of that office, because my understanding is that the governor's executive order makes it an independent office. But he also established
the governor just recently hired somebody about 2 months ago to start looking into fraud. But this was a statutorily defined Office of Inspector General that had actual authority to go and oversee all of these programs. This was not a controversial position, right? There's a reason that nearly 60 people in the state Senate could get on board with this idea. But then when it came to the state House, every single Democrat voted no.
I want to keep us on real quick this, because I think that we could go on fraud and what's being done. My initial take, because I know we're over an hour already, is that the governor has been in this job for 7 years. This committee's been on board for one legislative cycle, and not even a full one at that, because the Dems didn't show up for the first month. But so I expect more to come out from that. But when we look at this, and your point of, Julius, of who is tied to the governor and what to know, first I want to say, I do appreciate you always being consistent and acknowledging that this is bad, that what is going on is obviously on its face bad. I think that is, I appreciate you looking at this situation and saying that and being very open and honest with that at the time. This is where, though, regardless of whether it's somebody that is friends with Walz or knows Walz or anything, we need to, again, look back, I think, as this is a private company, as a CEO. It is folks that are doing the bidding for Governor Walz. It's folks who either are appointed or confirmed because of him and his office. And if they're not doing their job, that again, the buck stops with Walz, and he has said that. And this is a situation where it certainly is the case. I saw a tweet, I think it was Nick Halter with the Business Journal. I don't remember exactly, but I wrote down the tweet itself. It says, if a CEO or nonprofit leader who allowed this level of fiscal mismanagement, even if they did not benefit personally from it, would they have not been forced into early retirement or possibly the subject of civil liability. I mean, had this been any corporation, any other entity, an individual who allowed this much fraud under their watch, and in this situation, clearly a systemic environment where it is the system inviting the exploitation, not just fraudsters exploiting the system. It is the system. It is the problem. There are fraudsters, obviously the problem, but this is something that I think it is really impossible that we cannot point to the governor, or at the very least, commissioners of these different agencies who still remain in their jobs. And to John's point that I hadn't heard the 3 weeks ago is when he found out. I was curious. That was one of my questions of when he found out. I too don't believe that it was a coincidence. I'm now going to turn my questions for an upcoming episode after we get a new gubernatorial candidate in the race of, for example, if it's Amy Klobuchar who met with the governor last weekend, did she know? And then why, it just reeks of issues and fraud and all of the systemic problems that have been going on. And obviously there was an environment that said, it's okay, you can do it. Julius, I want you to have the last word before we'll do a quick round robin and close things out here because of time.
Yeah, I just want to point out what the governor said in his press conference when he talked about why he's not running, which is one, it's to make the suspicion that it's because of this is pretty not true. He said very clearly that it's because he was not really all in it, which is totally fair when your family's getting death threats and your kids are getting death threats and have to leave the state that they live in to come here because they're worried about their life. Listen, the governor was going to win no matter what. I've seen the internals after the fraud situation. None of your candidates were winning still anyways. Had they gained a couple points, I think there was maybe one or two that made some jump. But outside of that, like, the governor was going to win. His team feels confident in it. I feel confident in it. I think most people would tell you that you guys were still the underdogs in this situation. But ultimately, the reality is, he said something that I think is very true about the situation at hand. There's a lot of insinuation or claim that somehow the governor had something to do with this, that he's complicit in this, that he's a part of this fraud issue, that everything is all about him. Release it. If you guys have that, show everyone the truth. Okay. What I'm telling you is release it. If you guys have proof that he committed fraud, or he was a part of a
Here's
fraud
the Olay
situation,
report that his administration.
Release any emails, release any files that show that he was aware and complicit in this fraud taking place in the state for so long. The other part I want to mention too I'm going to finish this part.
Let Julius finish and then John.
Kristen Robbins said yesterday in her hearing at the House of Representatives that they've been getting credible reports of fraud since 2009. The last time I checked, Governor Walz hasn't been governor since 2009. But Republicans did have a Senate and House majority at one point during that time frame up until 2018. They didn't do anything about these credible reports. In fact, Becky, your old boss was in the House of Representatives talking about claims of fraud during a hearing when Republicans had the Senate and the House, and they didn't do anything. So to me, it's really disingenuous, again, to say everything's all Walz's fault, but then Kristen Robbins is going out there and saying they've known about fraud since 2009. Listen, does the buck stop with him? He said it stops with him. Is Walz doing something? By the way, Director of Program Integrity, who's a very credible and well-respected judge on both sides of the aisle, does that mean nothing? Here's the problem with Republicans' messaging on this, and here's why it honestly is not going to work after Walz leaves office or has stopped running for re-election. It pins it on one person, but people see through all the fallacies. People see through all the issues that you guys are like trying to bring up as these major scandal, corruptions, whatever, and it's not sticking. It doesn't work. People see through the garbage, and the reality is the fraud committee hasn't done anything. You guys have a speaker who hasn't done anything. And you can't, like, at this point, you can't say, oh, well, Walz is not doing anything. He is. And then the argument is, oh, well, it's not enough or it's a little too late. What have Republicans done? You just had the chair of the fraud committee say that Republicans have been getting credible reports of fraud since 2009. You had a state Senate majority, you had a state House majority, and you did nothing. So we can do this, but you did this, but you did that. I could come back with the same exact response, which is you guys had enough people in the House and the Senate to get things passed to curb these credible reports that you've been getting since 2009, and you haven't. And by the way, the reports that you're getting now from the fraud committee, where they're hiding them from the administration so that nothing can be done about it, is Kristen Robbins just trying to revive her dead gubernatorial campaign, and she wants to play politics with credible reports of fraud because she doesn't want it to be solved because it's the only thing that keeps you guys in play in this state. And when Amy Klobuchar jumps in the race, like she inevitably probably will, then it doesn't hold and it doesn't stick. So,
John, before I go to you, I just have to real quick. I need to take a deep breath. I think that Republicans had some majorities and everything, but the key point that I think this report says is that it was an environment. It all happened under the last 2 decades of Democrats in the governor's office. And so clearly, from my perspective, that is a culture saying this is okay, look the other way, we don't need checks, we don't need balances, Republicans aren't going to pass anything. Even if they pass it on the floor, it's not going to be signed into law. And Governor Walz is the boss. I'm not saying that he knew. I'm not saying people emailed him and said, hey, I'm going to sign off on a $670,000 grant and then go work for the person. You good with that, sir? I don't think that's the case at all. But at what point is incompetence and misconduct that you need to be competent? You need to be saying, I have a handle on the oversight that is being done by the people that I have said are the heads of these agencies, and that they are competent enough to know what is going on within their agencies, and that their employees are acting as good stewards of the taxpayer dollars and in accordance to law. And if that's not the case, and it happens time and time again in multiple agencies, in multiple spots around a grant agency or oversight or follow-up or whatever it is, because we have 13 different places to look for this, I think, like I said in last episode, I don't necessarily always agree with the federal government stepping in. I think this is warranted. I think this is an issue. I think that Governor Walz saw this coming, and I don't disagree. Sure, his kids, the family, all of the different things, his head wasn't in it. I think those are all valid. I think that fraud is the majority, 51% of his decision, this coming out, and the fact that he did it the day before. There's no coincidence that it's a coincidence. John, final words on the matter.
I was trying to figure out which of the absurd statements that Julius made to play whack-a-mole with, but when you're arguing so many contradictory things all at once, it gets a little bit tricky. The idea that Governor Walz, you keep saying release something and then say, show me something that he knew that there was fraud in the government. And is your argument really that he was so inept that he knew less about fraud going on in his government and couldn't read the Star Tribune or watch Care 11, and that their reporters knew more than him?
I thought Republicans were saying that the Star Tribune wasn't reporting on it. That's what Walter Hudson said yesterday. I thought they weren't reporting on it.
I'm talking.
Yeah.
So the reality is that Governor Walz absolutely had to have known, and he instead chose to not take action. You know why? When you talk about that program integrity director, that was like a month ago after we found out that $9 billion had been stolen. That is far too little, far too late. When he had a chance to actually do something, he did nothing. Governor Walz was set to lose, and lose to just about any candidate that Republicans could put up. So no, and now you want to play the blame game with legislators who got to office in 2019.
It's what you guys are doing. It's what you guys are doing. It's the blame
You
game.
want to talk about legislators who got to office in 2019 like it's their fault that the legislative auditor and reporters were reporting on this back in before they ever ran for office? The very first bill that Speaker Dameth ever carried as a legislator was oversight for childcare to cut down on fraud. You want to know what the controversial thing that she thought that you should have to do if you get CCAP programming money was, that the Democrats all universally rejected? It was that you should have to take attendance so that we knew what day we were paying for kids to be there. That's it. They don't have to take attendance and keep records of the kids who are at daycare getting taxpayer-funded daycare. That was her first bill that she carried because it is so absurd that our government doesn't do it, and the Democrats opposed it.
Thank you guys both. We have run out of time. We don't even have time to get back into the congressional hearing, which on Monday during our bonus episode, we thought was going to be the majority of this episode. So I want to thank you both. Again, I know there's a lot going on. I know that we have very differing opinions. And when we come back to the situation that's going on this week, a lot of emotions, a lot of passion, a lot of confusion and uncertainty of what happened and what's to come. But I want to thank you guys for being here and voicing your opinions and representing your side and folks who believe and think the way you do, because it is important that, and that's something that Michael and I strive to do, is to make sure that we are platforming folks from different sides that have different opinions. And there are certainly differing opinions here. So thank you guys for being here, participating in this, and we will absolutely have you back and have more conversations about the 2026 election, about what polling says or who we think is going to win or will win, who's going to get it, how fraud plays into all of it. So thank you guys.
Becky, we just finished an interview with Julius Hernandez and John Rouleau discussing the week's events, an episode that we weren't planning on focusing on. We had been planning on discussing the congressional testimony. That's what we had slated in for the day. We'll cover that next week. Your take on the interview.
I always appreciate our panels, discussions, and the individuals that we have here. We obviously had Julius and John, who have been with us a lot. And I think it's a really tough topic to discuss with so much passion and with so much emotions behind it. And I think it's very evident, and I think it highlights very well the partisan divide that we do have in this country, kind of the what we see and hear in our own little echo chambers or in our own bubbles, right? Because I think that we exist where we exist and surround ourselves with certain people that maybe agree or disagree, but we dig in our heels. And I think, well, I got a little fired up there, and I apologize if anybody took offense to that, but I think for me, I do stand so close to the middle sometimes. And I think in situations like this where I agree that taking violent illegal criminals off the street needs to happen. I believe that there's a failure in our justice system that is not prosecuting and putting these criminals away, whether that is in our jail system or in the country where they came from. I also believe that there are some horrific things being done to individuals. And do I necessarily agree with everything that's going on in our state with this? No. And I think that's where I understand Julius's frustration with the both sides of it, because I understand where he sits and where he comes from is not in the middle like me. And same with John. I understand where he sits and what he thinks is not right in the middle where I sit and think. And so I think is one thing I just want to plead to any of our listeners is I understand the both sidesism is frustrating, but there is a place to sit there. And that's where I sit. And I think that's where there are some people that sit that understand both sides of some issues, that want more facts in this situation, that understand a tragic life was lost and a mother, daughter, wife was killed. I understand that there is a possibility that an individual felt his life was in danger and acted what he thought he needed to do. I don't have those facts. And I think we're going to get more information here. But ultimately, I also understand that it comes down to a distrust in government. And I think that unfortunately is being inflamed by government, by our state government and by our federal government. And I wish I had an answer to it. It's so frustrating, and it honestly could cry just because it is so frustrating to be here again, that it is the start of 2026 and we're in this really icky, messy, tragic space again. But I'm grateful for folks like Julius and John who are willing to come on and have hard conversations and disagree with each other and at times even be a little incredulous with what the other side is saying. But I enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you did as well.
I thought it was a really good conversation. It was an important conversation had. Again, this wasn't what we planned on discussing this week. We just planned on discussing the congressional hearing. I think we should punt on that. We did, I think, a good job of reconfiguring the schedule based on the events of the week. We'll talk about that hearing more. There's some other lighthearted subjects I think that we were going to probably discuss in closing that we should punt to next week to discuss some updates on some things. But I will say to you that while I think it's really important that we have those conversations like we just had, I also will say to you, Becky, that I think it's important that our position, and I agree with you a lot, is also platformed. I think that most people fall where I think we are. I think most people look at a situation and they're not reacting that it's, I legitimately see criticisms on both sides. I see a situation where, yes, a woman should not be killed. It is horrific that Renee Good's life was lost in that situation. I also say to myself, when you have your vehicle in and the investigation is going to determine the place where that vehicle is, I'm going to be very curious in the course of the investigation to understand what was the purpose of, why was her vehicle there? What was it doing? Was it stuck in the snow? Was she involved in a protest? Was she interfering with law enforcement? All of those things are going to dictate my reaction and, to some degree, responsibility and how I distribute the responsibility for the events of yesterday and put that on and how I dole that out to the situation. That's where the investigation is going to lead. But what I would rely on is the steady hand of the state or federal government to lead that investigation. I have concerns because it is not the career bureaucrats that John Rouleau was talking about that are speaking right now. It is not the steady hands that are going to be doing these investigations that are dominating the news and dominating social media. It is our leaders on both sides of the aisle who are inflaming the situation. So it is reasonable for people like, I think for a lot of people, including me, to say, I do want there to be additional eyes on the investigation, because I have concerns that some of the comments that have been made so far could potentially taint or prejudge an investigation or shape the focus of it. That's where this is going to have a lingering effect. I'm so very proud of the conversation that we have. I have a lot more to say. And I think next week we can get into more of, I think, our observations both on the events of, sadly, the events of this week, but also other political events, and you and I can dive in a bit deeper down. But I think we did a great job. I think you did a great job of leading a very difficult conversation about where our state is at right now, where our country's at. And sadly, Becky, you have become very good at leading these types of podcast episodes about subjects that we did not have scheduled to discuss. I'm incredibly proud of you and how you managed it and how you facilitated it. I know our listeners appreciate it. I know everyone who listens always comes back and discusses the thoughtfulness in which you lead these episodes. You did it once again, and I think we'll have more to discuss next week.
Looking forward to it.
I want to thank you, Becky, and I want to thank all of our listeners for joining us for this episode of The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can also follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Everyone stay safe, everyone be well, and thank you for joining us.
Bye.